Hi, and welcome to Not Right in the Head, starring the Hammer and Dr. Wonky. And we have a guest today, Cindy Black, and she's the executive director of Fixed Democracy First since 2016. She was also the campaign director for W. Amen's successful statewide 2016 ballot. And she is going to be on right now.
In Washington State, yeah.
In Washington.
Okay.
Hello, Cindy.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great.
Hi, Cindy. Nice to have you on the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Thanks for coming. So tell us about Fixed Democracy First. This has been an organization that you started this organization in 2016, or you've been the executive director since. Tell us a little bit about Fixed Democracy First.
Yeah, I've been the director since 2016. The organization actually started quite a few years before that. It used to be called Washington Public Campaigns, that started to work on overturning a state law here in Washington that prohibited public funding of elections. And then in 2014 changed its name to Fixed Democracy First. So we're a nonpartisan pro-democracy organization based in Washington State, and we work on local, state, and federal reforms that strengthen democracy, from money and election issues, voting access and rights, alternative voting systems, civic outreach, and things like that. So,
yeah, and I'm curious about this, how it got started, the law that prohibited public funding of elections. That's how the organization started?
Yeah. So basically, it was part of a ballot initiative, and I forget the number of it. I don't have it in front of me, but
about how long ago was that?
That was back, I want to say, in the early 2000s.
Okay.
It was part of a ballot initiative because in the 1980s, both Seattle and King County had public funding in their elections, and then it was added to a ballot initiative. It was like an add-on piece that basically prohibited public funding of an election. So the organization started back in around 2008, I believe, 2007, to work on overturning that and make it able for places in Washington State to incorporate public funding in their elections again.
Okay. And so then you become director since 2016. Now, were you part of the organization before that?
No, I got started with an organization called WAMEN, the Washington Coalition to Amend the Constitution, that came about to get a ballot initiative. Well, first I tried to get it through the state legislature, but ultimately it was a statewide ballot initiative asking for Congress, our congressional representatives, to pass a constitutional amendment to reverse the Citizens United decision back from 2010. Mm-hmm. So I came on board as a volunteer for that, and then eventually became in a leadership position, and then a position opened up for the campaign director, but also to stay on as the new executive director of Fixed Democracy First. I was actually selling art supplies at the time, but I was working on this as a volunteer and was way more interested in this work as a volunteer. And so I decided to make it my profession.
So Citizens United was a real peak of interest. Is that kind of your that's the issue that has got you involved with this? Is that what you were really interested in? That's why
money and election, corporate influence on our policies, and just democracy in general. That became an interest of mine. I actually got interested when Occupy happened, and then it sort of evolved from there.
Okay. So now, what is the thrust of Fixed Democracy First this year? What's going on now, or within the last, let's say, the last couple of years? Where are you headed at this point? What's the main issue? What are the main issues?
Well, we've been supporting alternative voting systems like ranked choice voting. We support those reforms. Also, we've been expanding civic outreach. We started a program called Women in Office Now to train women to run for office.
Yeah.
Locally and on a state level. And then we also are working on we support lots of pro-democracy reforms in the legislature, but right now we're starting to work on expanding public funding of elections statewide, similar to the Seattle voucher program that gives Seattle residents $425 vouchers to $25 vouchers to give to candidates of their choice. We'd like to see that a program like that similar on a statewide level. So we're working on that
Oh,
right now.
okay. So that's that's a public funding. I wasn't really aware of that. Or maybe I had heard of that, but that's so somebody can apply for, I guess it would be $100 voucher that they can distribute the way they want to.
Well, they don't even have to apply for it. If you're
Tell us how that works.
So basically, the Seattle Ethics and Elections Commission oversees the program. It was from a ballot initiative back in 2015 to get this program, and it started. 2017 was the first year. It's funded by a property tax that the voters approved of. So anybody that's a registered voter in Seattle automatically gets sent those vouchers in the mail that they can distribute it. But you can also, you know, assign your vouchers online, but it's also open to legal residents. So green card holders, which are also eligible to donate to elections, are also eligible to request these. So they don't send them out in the mail to legal residents, but legal residents can request those online or through a phone call or an email and ask those be sent to them so they can use.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's a really novel. It takes the whole. I mean, it's very much at an individual level then that that public funding takes on that. Really, every person has their choice, whether it's they can support a Republican or a Democrat or an independent or green. Yeah, that's
great. What's great about it is that it enables people that don't have a lot of money to run for office. So lower income communities of color and women tend to be groups that don't run for office often because of money issues. So this opens the door to them. And it also forces the candidates to do direct contact with their constituents rather than just hosting a big fundraising event. They actually have to knock on doors and do outreach to their community members to be able to solicit these donations.
Right. So we'll talk a little bit about how you see elections. What are the challenges in Washington State, and of course, I mean nationally. There's, and I know. Well, first, before you do that, tell us because you have your own Facebook Live podcast, and so tell us about what is the thrust of that and your goals and intentions there, and when is it on, and all about that, so the people that maybe tune into our can learn about when they can hear you and see your show.
Sure. So I host a weekly democracy happy hour on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Pacific time.
Right. And bring a drink and join. Yeah, I know. Okay.
Yeah, you
I
can.
do.
Well, it's funny when I started this at the beginning of the pandemic because I wasn't sure what I was going to do with my time. And I said, well, we have a Zoom account. I might as well start hosting meetings. And I started as a coffee hour in the morning and nobody showed up. But then I decided to call it a happy hour.
Yeah, we know that feeling and nobody shows up. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's been a really good turnout. People really like it. I cover democracy headlines in the news and then a topic of the week and then some open discussion so that folks that join can talk about any democracy related topics.
Right. Well, no, truth be told that nobody shows up that's why we thought, let's get Cindy on and then maybe someone will show up to watch her. Right. That's what we thought, is that nobody shows up to watch us, but we know people watch her. So let's have her on.
Well, and it's grown. I mean, that didn't happen overnight. That's sort of happened over a couple of years that people regularly show up now. And I've gotten good feedback. I've changed it a bit around. It used to be just an hour. We expanded it to an hour and a half to accommodate for more open discussion, which I really like that part of it the most, actually.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and it's true. It's like probably anything, it takes time to develop. I mean, just not just an audience on a podcast or a Facebook Live thing, but to get people away, becoming aware of democracy. I think, is it your perception? I would just, from my perspective, the lack of knowledge about democracy in America is, it's astonishing. What people don't understand about how our country works, how our democracy works. I mean, I'm not talking from a hardcore law point of view, but just I think people don't really understand. It's not the Constitution and our democratic process it's not intuitively obvious to people about, and people are astonished about what, for instance, what's going on in a lot of red states. Can they really do that? And it's like, well, yeah, and that's not to that's above and beyond, besides what the Supreme Court allows them to do. Those are debatable things, but there are things that, yeah, they can do that. And we've got some big issues coming up with the Supreme Court, right? In terms of that, don't we?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think a lack of civics education has been part of the problem. That has been eliminated from many schools. It's trying to make a comeback and more schools are adding it. But I think civics education in general, for no matter what age you are, whether you're in high school or middle school or you're an adult, I think we need to have more opportunities for people to learn about issues facing democracy in particular, especially with how things are going now. I mean, social media has contributed a lot to the misinformation, just how they work. They tend to get more negative postings, gets more positive, well, not positive feedback, but feedback, so you get more of those in your feed. So I think there's a lot that contribute to the lack of knowledge, but I think there's a need for that in a big way, and a lot of people are looking for opportunities to learn more.
Right. And I can think of even when I was in, I when I went to high school as seniors, we had to have U.S. government, I guess they call it civics, but it was called U.S. government. And I would say that it was such a basic course that there were so many really misunderstandings about what federalism is. I don't even know if we even addressed the word federalism. There was this idea that, there's the federal government and they reign over everybody. We never really knew about. I didn't realize for a long time, that there's a federal and state governments, and they're different and they have different power. This was not talked about, and now we're seeing, on the right for sure, they understand that concept and they're taking advantage of it. So getting up into this election, I'm just curious because our discussion is often kind of just analysis. Is what do you make of these polls? In terms of what seems confusing is that we have had, first of all, since the overturning of Roe versus Wade with the Dobbs decision, the Dobbs decision has energized the Democratic base. There's been, as far as I can tell, from what I hear, at least from the media, record turnout, which favors Democrats. Yet we're supposed to believe that the polls are tightening so much that the Republicans may just, it's going to be a red wave, not a blue wave. What can we trust? How do we put this in perspective in your view?
Yeah, polling is an interesting thing. The hard part about that is it takes a very small percentage of people that they talk to about this. So you're getting really just a really small sampling of what the public believes or feels. And sometimes people are not honest with pollsters. So I think you have to take any poll with a grain of salt and just this may give you a little bit of information, but it's not going to give the complete picture. Mm-hmm. And the reality is we're not going to know until election happens, and not even election night. It takes a long time for all the ballots to get counted, especially like Washington State's an all mail-in state. And it takes a while to get all of those ballots counted. So we're used to here in Washington knowing we're not going to get the full election results for a couple of weeks. And if races are super close, there may be a recount and so forth. So I think we don't know until all the votes are counted, and it's really important. The problem is there's a lot of misinformation, and people expect to get election results. And if they change, there's like they claim fraud, but that's just not the case. I mean, we never know the full election results until days afterwards. We can have an understanding of what the preliminary results are, but we may not know for days what the final tally is. And unfortunately, that's being used to spread information. There was a report out just recently about election fraud and how rare it is, especially you consider there's over 8,000 election workers across the country of various different political beliefs. 90% of voters use a paper ballot, which are easier to track. So it makes it virtually impossible for widespread fraud to happen, especially on a federal level. Does fraud ever happen? Sure, but it's very rare. But
Well,
it's
wouldn't it be, you talk about the 8,000 election workers. Now, I talked to a local election worker where I live about the public accuracy tests and so on. And just in conversation, I said, so the idea that there was fraud, and really in the 2020 election, all of the Trump claims for fraud, all of the more than 60 court cases, they didn't bring anyone to court. They didn't sue anybody. Mm-hmm. They just went to court and say, oh, something's fishy here, and expected the court to say, well, let us figure this out. But that's not what courts do. I mean, we have an adversarial process, and the court is supposed to be the neutral arbiter of the process. So if they didn't bring anybody to court and say there's fraud and that's the person who's responsible and let me prove what they did, and then that party gets to respond and say, no, we did not, that didn't happen. And so I thought, well, they're really heaping this on the election workers. If there's fraud, it's not the voters, it's the election workers in some way not doing their jobs. That's what that really comes down to, whether it's not accurately vetting each, if there's voters who are voting who shouldn't be, that's the election workers, not, the count or the city clerk or your district jurisdictional clerk, not properly vetting the signature, or if it's a mail-in or whatever. But that's what it really comes down to. And yet that's not, I think almost every election worker, I don't care what their what their persuasion is politically, would object to that, don't you?
Yeah. And most election workers I know, everyone I've talked to, really care about elections and want to make sure it's accurate, regardless of what party they belong to. They're dedicated people. What's interesting is it's not easy to be an election worker. There's a lot of work involved with that. And they used to not get any attention whatsoever. Everybody just assumed everything. It's because of misinformation that gets put out there about this that they've gotten so much negative attention. But the reality of election workers is that they do care about having fair elections that are able to prove that there was no fraud, and they go after fraud. Most election fraud, people get caught. It's very difficult to get away with that. There was a lot of talk about, non-citizens voting, but we just don't see that. Some people make honest mistakes and think they're eligible to vote and they're not, and they usually get caught. But when you're talking about mass amounts of people trying to put through a vote that aren't eligible, they're going to get caught. And the problem is if they're trying to be a U.S. citizen, they immediately lose that ability. So they have a lot to lose if they, try to vote in an election they're not eligible for. So there's just been no hard evidence of anything. There's been a lot of speculation and saying, well, this is wrong, the machines are wrong. Well, there's just been no proof whatsoever. And you think with all these people looking for evidence, they would have found some by now, but they just haven't.
Right. So Washington State has had is one of the states that has all mail-in, and I can't remember. It seems to me is it maybe you know the exact year. Was it 2004 or when was it that?
Well,
Washington
it's
State
been
became
actually
all-
for over a dozen years, or over a decade that the entire state
Okay.
is voting by mail. It
Yeah.
kind of came on slowly. Some counties started vote by mail, and then it eventually moved to all the counties having vote by mail. So
Right.
it's been definitely over a decade, probably closer to 12 years that the state
Okay.
has been voting by mail, which I love. It's
Yeah,
great.
and it's all paid for by the state, which I think I actually probably I think I had something to do with that. I think it was about the 2004 election that was a very, very long ballot, and being blind myself, I only put one stamp on the envelope, and I was pissed to find that it came back like about 4 days after election day. And I called everybody and said, this is crap. You know, I mean, you guys should be paying for it anyway, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're holding an election. Why should it be that I didn't put 2 stamps on why my ballot wasn't counted? I shouldn't even have to pay for it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're holding polls open, why do I have, it's like a poll tax to make me put basically over $1 on the envelope.
Yeah.
I mean,
And back in 2018, well, King County started it where you get paid postage for your ballot.
yeah.
And then about 4 years ago, it passed a bill in the state making it statewide. So
Right.
you no longer have to put a stamp. But we also view that as a poll tax. I remember testifying on those bills in the legislature to say this is a form of a poll tax. We shouldn't have that. And so now you have the option to just drop it in the mail without a stamp, or drop it off a drop-off location or your county election office. So you have a lot of options now, and it's very convenient.
Right. And so are the the ballots were the problem in 2020, the ballots. And so how does our state stack up? I think no worse certainly than any other state that doesn't have mail-in ballot or has for instance, there are still states that have, you need to have an excuse to vote absentee. How does it, if you're aware of the statistics or any measures of how does it, and there are a few other states that have all mail-in, how does the all mail-in states, how do they stack up?
Well, Oregon is number 1 and Washington is number 2 when it comes to voting access, which means the time it takes, registering to vote, all these other things. And there's also room for improvement. I know they're improving ballot signature verification issues. There's a bill I think the Secretary of State's interested in putting forward in the next session, whoever that, well, right now it's Steve Hobbs, that could change. Oregon, Washington are at the top of the list. Colorado's up there as well. And there are other states like Hawaii and others. California just recently in the past year moved to an all mail-in state. So voters really like it. It doesn't benefit any particular party because everybody's allowed to vote by mail, not just one particular party. I know there's a lot of talk. There's a group here in Washington trying to get rid of vote by mail, but I don't understand it because it doesn't benefit any particular party. It's just a convenience for voters. And it's nice not to have to wait in line or, take time off work to go vote. You can just do it at the comfort of your own home, and you have over 2 weeks to fill it out and turn it in when you're ready.
I used to like to go to the poll, and but since I can't see anymore, honestly, I didn't miss it when it was gone. I thought I would, but honestly, it turned out to be a bigger pain than I ever, I didn't really need, it was more of a ritual than anything. And I was just fine with it going away. Although I made it a point. I mean, I've never missed an election since I was eligible in 1978. So I think, but I prefer I just want to get the job done. I want to get my vote in. I understand there are people who like to go to the poll,
Yeah,
and
you can still do that. I mean, if you
Yeah.
want to go to your local election office, you can still vote in person if you want to. You
yeah,
won't-
that's right. You can, can't you? Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, you can still get your yeah, that's right. So okay, so other than the turnout, or other than the result about this year's election, what do you expect to see from we have a very contested well, as they like to say, we have a deeply divided country. I don't know that that's a good thing. I mean, we are the most deeply divided countries that are like ours end up in civil war. I mean, there are lots of them in Africa that are deeply divided and end up in civil war. If we're this deeply divided, is the election going to be kind of resolve the division and say, okay, because if we have a party where 300 candidates nationwide are election deniers and will not, including some leading top of the ticket candidates such as Michigan's Republican gubernatorial candidate Tudor Dixon has said she may not accept the results. May not means, I suppose, unless I win.
Yeah.
And there are other candidates around Pennsylvania, Doug Mastriani. These are 300 election deniers. And their supporters who. So what do we expect? Do we expect to see an election that is one that brings resolution or not?
Resolution, probably not. I think the divisions are too deep right now. I think it's going to take a lot longer to get past that. Maybe a cultural shift, maybe younger generation coming up, which are much more open and, amenable to different people in their lives. I think it's going to take a while before we get out of this mess. I wish I had better news about that, but I don't think one election is going to do it. I think it's going to take time.
Yeah, and so we have deeper divisions, but somehow I don't see the divisions being these these heady wonky arguments over no single payer, no private insurance, no single pay. I'm not hearing that.
No.
I'm hearing on the one side Social Security, Medicare, single payer, and on the other side I'm hearing transgender is just I'm hearing every it seems like two paradigms that are near the twain shall meet. It's on the one side you have, actually I do think the Democrats are talking about political issues, public policy issues, and the other side, the Republicans I think are the party of social and cultural grievance. They want it to be about beliefs and social and cultural issues, which frankly I think whatever they are cannot be resolved at a poll, at the ballot box. I don't know how you resolve that. I mean, for instance, let's take transgenderism. Should somebody other than the person themselves be able to tell you what gender you are? I mean, whether you want to make a scientific argument or not, does that mean government can tell you? That cannot be resolved
Unfortunately it's become a real us versus them, and I think it has been a Republican strategy to go down that road because that kind of gets their base going and they get their support. But I think it's going to take really a united cross-partisan group of people to get past all of this. That includes Democrats, progressives, independents, moderates, Republicans. Unfortunately, the more extreme you go to either side, they may be the people that are the outliers, but I think there's a whole lot more people in the middle that really care about democracy and how it works and the country moving forward. And I'm attending more and more of those type of meetings with people from we may not agree on different policy, but we agree that we need to make sure the country keeps going and democracy keeps going. So I think we're going to see more of that type of coalition building. That gives me hope, and not necessarily about the nitty gritty of the policies, but the fact that we do agree that democracy is an important system that we have and we need to save it.
I think
So,
that's yeah.
anyways, I don't want to interrupt, but our time is up.
Well, I think Cindy's last word was a good place to stop.
Yeah. So
democracy is worth-
thanks for coming over to see us today. Go see Cindy Black at Fix Democracy First at 5 o'clock today.
At 5 o'clock today. You can find out about it at fixdemocracyfirst.org. Look under events and you can see the link to join the meeting.
Okay, there we have it. Thank you so much for joining us. And
thank you for having me.
This has been Not Right in the Head, starring Joyce, Nance, and Paul Richardson, and we'll see you next week.